the day the queen became a prisoner. Autumn, 480 BCE. The royal audience hall at Susa, capital of the Persian Empire. The doors open with the sound of bronze scraping against stone. Torchlight flickers against columns that stretch upward into shadow, each one carved from black marble veined with gold. The air is thick with frankincense and myrrh, smoke coiling through shafts of late afternoon sun that cut through high windows like blades. A woman walks forward. Not walks, is pushed. Her feet are bare against the polished floor, and each step leaves a faint mark of dust from the road. She wears what was once a royal gown, now torn at the hem, stained with the red earth of 1,000 miles. Her wrists bear the ghost marks of chains, recently removed. Her hair, once arranged in the elaborate style of a Greek queen, hangs loose and tangled down her back. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a platform of cedar and gold, sits Xerxes, king of kings, ruler of the four corners of the earth, shadow of Ahura Mazda upon the mortal world. He does not move. He does not speak. He simply watches. Behind him stand the immortals, 10,000 warriors who have never known defeat, their spears perfectly vertical, their faces hidden behind masks of hammered bronze. To his left and right, scribes kneel with clay tablets, ready to record every word, every judgment, every sentence that will reshape a life. The woman stops 10 paces from the throne. A guard places his hand on her shoulder, forcing her to her knees. The marble is cold. She can hear her own breathing, shallow and quick. She can smell the fierce sweat beneath the perfume they forced upon her before this audience. She looks up. Xerxes looks down. Imagine watching your kingdom fall. Imagine knowing your husband fought until his last breath, that his body was left on the battlefield while you were taken alive, separated from your children, herded with the other women of the royal household onto ships that sailed east, always east, toward the heart of an empire so vast it swallows nations whole. And imagine what comes next. Not death, not the clean mercy of an executioner's blade. Something far worse. Xerxes raises one hand. A scribe steps forward and reads from a tablet in a language she is only beginning to understand. You are property of the King of Kings. Your past has ended. Your future belongs to Persia. The woman does not scream. Screaming would waste breath she might need to survive the years ahead. If you want more hidden stories like this, subscribe to Humans History, because what happens in this hall is the part of history they never taught you. Who Xerxes was and why his power terrified the world. Picture a map unfurling across a cedar table in the palace of Persepolis. Ink marks trace the boundaries of the known world. From the deserts of Egypt in the west to the mountains of the Hindu Kush in the east. From the frozen steppes of Scythia in the north to the burning coasts of Arabia in the south. Every mark, every line, every name written in old Persian cuneiform represents a kingdom that knelt, a king who submitted, a people who learned to speak the words King of Kings with the proper mixture of reverence and terror. This was the inheritance of Xerxes, son of Darius the Great, grandson of Cyrus the Conqueror. He took the throne in 486 BCE, when the Persian Empire was already the largest political entity the world had ever seen. But size alone did not make it powerful. What made it powerful was the system. Xerxes did not rule from a single city. He ruled from Susa in winter, from Ecbatana in summer, from Persepolis during the sacred festivals, from Babylon when the eastern provinces required attention. He moved like a living shadow across his empire, and wherever he went, a small city moved with him. 10,000 immortals, 5,000 cavalry, 3,000 servants, hundreds of scribes, cooks, musicians, and among them, always the hostages. The women, the daughters of kings who had surrendered, the wives of governors who had sworn loyalty, the sisters of tribal chieftains who had bent the knee. They traveled in covered wagons, dressed in silk and gold, attended by eunuchs, never permitted to leave, never permitted to return home, living proof that Persian power reached into the bedchambers and nurseries of every conquered land. Xerxes believed, as his father and grandfather had believed, that he ruled by divine mandate. Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light and truth, had chosen the Persian people to bring order to the chaos of the world. Every rebellion was not merely a political act, but a religious transgression. Every king who defied Persia was defying heaven itself. And heaven, as interpreted by Xerxes, was not merciful. In the throne room at Persepolis, carved into the stone behind the royal seat, is a relief showing Xerxes seated beneath the winged disk of Ahura Mazda. Below him, a line of subject peoples brings tribute: gold from Lydia, horses from Media, incense from Arabia. And at the end of the line, barely visible unless you know to look for it, are women, heads bowed, hand-bound, walking in a procession that has no end. The sculptor who carved that relief knew what he was depicting. Not tribute, not gifts, warnings, living, breathing warnings that traveled with the king wherever he went, reminders to every ambassador, every visiting prince, every potential rebel of what happened when you raise your hand against the throne. Xerxes was not unusually cruel by the standards of his age. He was methodical. He understood that power is not maintained by victory alone, but by the constant, visible demonstration of consequences. And the consequences he chose to demonstrate were not written on battlefields, where bodies could be buried and forgotten. They were written on the lives of women, where they could be seen for decades, a slow-motion destruction that was, in many ways, more terrifying than any massacre. By the time Xerxes turned his attention to Greece in 480 BCE, he had already perfected this system. The women of rebels and defeated kings did not die. They entered the palace, and the palace, as those who entered it soon learned, was the most beautiful prison ever devised by human hands. How Persian power worked: families as hostages. The messenger arrives at dawn. His horse is lathered with sweat, foam dripping from bit. The guards at the city gate recognize the seal on a leather tube he carries, the winged lion of Persia, stamped in red wax. They let him pass without question. By mid-morning, he is in the throne room of a small kingdom on the edge of the empire, a place that has always paid tribute but never quite surrendered its independence. The local king sits on a modest wooden throne, carved by his grandfather's craftsman. The messenger does not bow deeply. He has delivered this message before in a dozen cities, in a dozen languages. The King of Kings requires your presence at Susa. Bring your tribute. Bring your oath of loyalty. A pause. Bring your eldest daughter. The room goes silent. The king's advisors glance at each other. Everyone understands what those words mean. The messenger continues, his voice flat, practiced. Your kingdom will remain yours. Your people will not be harmed. Your tribute will be reasonable. All we ask is your loyalty and a guarantee of that loyalty. The guarantee is not gold. The guarantee is flesh and blood. This was the genius of Persian imperial strategy. They did not occupy every city with garrisons. They did not replace every king with a Persian governor. Instead, they allowed local rulers to remain in power, to keep their palaces, their titles, their illusions of sovereignty. But they took something more valuable than any of these things. They took family. A king could plot rebellion in his own palace, could whisper to his generals, could forge secret alliances with neighboring kingdoms. But every plan, every whispered word, every moment of defiant thought was shadowed by a simple question. What will happen to my daughter when Persian soldiers arrive at the palace gates? Picture the scene a week later. The king and his household have made the decision. They have no choice. To refuse is to invite total war. And total war against Persia is not war, it is national suicide. So a caravan assembles in the courtyard. Chests of gold and silver, rolled carpets from the royal workshops, jars of honey and wine, and standing beside her father's horse, dressed in traveling clothes, a 17-year-old girl who has never left her homeland. Her mother weeps, but makes no sound. To weep loudly would be to insult the Persian envoy, and insults can be fatal. The girl looks back once as the caravan begins to move. She sees her city walls, the temple where she prayed as a child, the garden where she played with her sisters. She tries to memorize every detail because somewhere, deep in her heart, she already knows she will never see these walls again. The journey to the Persian heartland takes months. Through mountain passes where snow still clings to the rocks in summer. Across deserts where the horizon shimmers with heat, and the only sound is the creak of wagon wheels and the breathing of camels. At night, she sleeps in tents guarded by soldiers who do not speak her language, who treat her with formal politeness that somehow feels more terrifying than cruelty. She is not beaten. She is not starved. She is fed well, given clean water, provided with servants. But she is never, not for one moment, free. When the caravan finally arrives at Susa, she is taken to the women's quarters of the palace. Eunuchs explain the rules in broken Greek, in Persian, in Aramaic, in whatever language she understands. You will learn our language. You will wear our clothes. You will eat our food. You will forget your gods and honor ours. You will smile when the King of Kings passes. You will never speak of your father's kingdom unless asked. You will never contact your family. You will never leave these walls without permission. And you will live. As long as your father obeys, you will live. She asks, once in a whisper to another captive woman she meets in the baths, "When can we go home?" The woman, a princess from a kingdom that fell 15 years ago, looks at her with eyes that have forgotten how to hope. This is home now. There is no other. A queen became a hostage. A princess became a bargaining chip. A wife became a warning. The captive procession, when cities fell, queens were taken. The city burns on the horizon, not with the wild flames of accident, but with the organized, methodical fire of conquest. The Persian army has broken through the gates at dawn, and by midday, the work of subjugation has begun. In the main square, soldiers separate the population. Scribes move through the crowd with clay tablets, writing names, recording professions, assessing value. Common folk will be relocated or released. Craftsmen will be transported to Persian cities where their skills are needed. But the soldiers are looking for specific faces. Royalty, nobility, the families of the men who chose to fight rather than surrender. A woman stands in the crowd, trying to blend in, her royal robes hidden beneath a common shawl. But someone has pointed her out, perhaps a servant, hoping to curry favor with the conquerors. Perhaps a rival family, settling old scores. It does not matter. A soldier approaches, removes the shawl, sees the gold necklace she could not bring herself to remove, the one her husband gave her on their wedding day. Royal household, he says in Persian. Another scribe makes a note. She is led to a separate area where other women of noble birth are being gathered. She recognizes them, the wife of the general who led the defense, the daughters of the city's council members, the elderly mother of the king, now dead, his body somewhere in the rubble of the palace. They are given water. They are told to sit. They wait. By evening, Persian officers arrive with more detailed instructions. Each woman is examined, not with lust, but with the cold assessment of inventory. Age, health, rank, family connections. Everything is recorded. A young princess, barely 14, is judged suitable for palace service. An older queen, perhaps 50, is marked for administrative household. She will manage other captives, train new arrivals, become a cog in the machine of captivity. The jewelry comes off first. Rings pried from fingers. Necklaces unclasped. Crowns removed and placed in wooden chests. These are not stolen. They are confiscated, properly recorded, added to the tribute that will be sent to the royal treasury. The women who wore them yesterday, as symbols of power, stand naked of ornament, stripped of everything that marked their status. Then come in new clothes, Persian style, long robes of silk dyed in the imperial colors, head coverings that obscure the face, sandals of soft leather. They're dressed like Persian women, but everyone knows they are not Persian women. They're property. The journey begins at dawn. A caravan of covered wagons, each one carrying 6 to 10 women, guarded by cavalry on all sides. The captives are not chained. Chains would damage valuable goods. But the message is clear. Run, and you'll be caught. Resist, and there are punishments worse than death. They travel for weeks, through territories they do not recognize, past cities they have never heard of. The landscape changes from the familiar hills of their homeland to foreign plains, to mountains, to deserts. One woman tries to mark the journey, scratching symbols on the wooden frame of the wagon to count the days. But after 40 marks, she stops. What difference does it make? At night, they are allowed to leave the wagons under guard. They eat meals prepared by Persian cooks, food flavored with spices they do not recognize. They sleep on carpets spread on the ground, staring up at stars that look the same as the stars over their burned city, but feel infinitely more distant. Some women weep. Some maintain a stony silence. Some whisper prayers to gods they are no longer allowed to name aloud. A queen became a hostage. A princess became a bargaining chip. A wife became a warning. And when the walls of Susa finally appear on the horizon, massive and golden in the morning sun, none of them feel relief. They feel the closing of a door that will never open again. Court life in a golden prison. The first thing she notices is the smell. Not the stench of captivity, but the overwhelming perfume of luxury. Roses and spikenard and cinnamon, oils burning in golden lamps, incense thick enough to taste. The air in the women's quarters of the palace is saturated with fragrance, as if beauty could be weaponized, turned into a form of control. She is led through corridors where every surface gleams. Walls inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian. Floors of polished marble, so smooth she can see her reflection. Tapestries depicting gardens that never existed, hunts that never happened. A perfect world that has no room for sorrow. The chief eunuch speaks to her in halting Greek. His voice is soft, almost kind, which somehow makes everything worse. You will bathe first. Then you will be examined by the physicians. Then you will be given your quarters and your duties will be explained. The bath is not a bath, but a ritual of transformation. She is scrubbed by silent attendants until her skin burns. Her hair is washed with oils that smell of distant kingdoms. Her nails are cleaned, shaped, painted. She is given a robe of Persian silk, so fine it weighs almost nothing, dyed a deep blue that she will learn is reserved for women of the inner palace. When she looks in the polished bronze mirror, she does not recognize herself. The physician is an older man who examines her with professional detachment. He checks her teeth, her eyes, her hands. He asks questions through a translator. Has she borne children? Does she suffer from any illnesses? Is she literate? Can she sing or play instruments? Every answer is recorded. She is not a person being interviewed. She is inventory being cataloged. Her quarters are more luxurious than any room she had in her father's palace. A bed with silk cushions. A window that overlooks an interior courtyard where fountains play endlessly, the water sparkling in sunlight. Carpets so thick her feet sink into them. Chests of clothing, all in Persian style, all in colors she did not choose. But there is no lock on the door. Or rather, there's a lock, but it is on the outside. The rules are explained by an older woman, a captive from a kingdom that fell before she was born. The woman speaks in a mixture of Persian and Greek, her accent showing the ghost of a language she has almost forgotten. You will rise when the gong sounds at dawn. You will attend morning prayers in the palace chapel, and you will pray to Ahura Mazda, even if you do not believe. You will learn Persian within 6 months, where your privileges will be reduced. You will never speak of your homeland unless directly asked by someone of higher rank. You will never attempt to send messages outside the palace. You will never refuse a direct order from the King of Kings, his appointed officials, or the chief eunuch. She listens. She has no choice but to listen. If you obey, your life will be comfortable. You will eat well. You will have servants. You may even be given responsibilities, positions of trust within a household. If you disobey, the older woman pauses. There are dungeons beneath this palace. Beautiful rooms above, darkness below. Remember that. The days begin to blur. Every morning, the same routine. Wash in perfumed water. Dress in silk. Attend prayers. Spend hours in the women's garden, where plants from across the empire grow in careful arrangements, exotic and beautiful and utterly artificial. She is surrounded by women, but she has never felt more alone. Some are captives like her. Others are wives of Persian nobles. Some are concubines, their status unclear, their smiles empty. They speak different languages, come from different worlds, and the one thing that unites them is that none of them can leave. Eunuchs watch every movement, not with cruelty, but with the tired professionalism of jailers who have been doing this work for decades. They are kind in their way. They bring her books when she seems restless. They make sure she has warm clothes when winter comes. But they never look away. There is no moment, waking or sleeping, when she is not observed. She learns Persian because refusing to learn would be pointless rebellion, the kind that hurts only herself. She learns to eat with her hands in the Persian manner. She learns to bow with the proper depth when anyone of rank passes. She learns to keep her face neutral, to smile on command, to make herself into whatever shape is required. But at night, alone in her beautiful room, she whispers her own name in her own language. She whispers her father's name, her mother's name, the names of her sisters. She whispers prayers to gods she is forbidden to worship aloud. She holds on to these secret words like stones in her hand, proof that somewhere beneath the silk and perfume, she still exists. The palace is beautiful. The palace is suffocating. The palace is a golden cage where women live for decades, growing old in rooms filled with treasures they cannot spend, surrounded by luxury they did not choose, free from every danger except the slow erosion of their own identities. Some of the older captives, the ones who have been here for 20 or 30 years, have forgotten their birth languages. They speak Persian with perfect accents. They wear Persian dress without thinking about it. They have become, in every visible way, Persian women. But sometimes, late at night, you can hear them weeping. And the weeping sounds the same in every language. The humiliation feasts, forced to serve the victor. Spring, 479 BC. The great hall of the palace at Susa has been prepared for a victory feast. Xerxes has returned from the west, from the Greek campaign that has consumed the empire's attention for 2 years. The news is complex, the victories mixed with setbacks, but tonight is for celebration. Tonight is for demonstrating power. The hall can hold 3,000 guests. Tonight, it holds every important official within 100 miles. Satraps from the western provinces, generals who led divisions in Greece, merchants who supplied the armies. They recline on couches arranged in perfect rows, surrounded by low tables already groaning with food. Roasted lamb stuffed with pomegranates. Whole fish from the Caspian Sea, grilled with herbs. Bread baked in a dozen styles. Dates and figs and pistachios. Wine from every corner of the empire, served in golden cups that catch the torchlight. And standing behind the couches, silent and still, are women. They wear identical robes of deep red silk. Their hair is arranged in the Persian style. Their faces are painted with the subtle cosmetics of the court. To the casual observer, they might be servants, skilled attendants trained to pour wine and clear plates with invisible efficiency. But if you look closely, if you know what to look for, you can see the truth. The slight tremor in a hand as it lifts a wine jug. The way one woman's eyes fix on the middle distance, seeing nothing. The absolute, crushing silence they maintain, as if speaking would shatter something inside them. They are not servants. They are the wives and daughters of Greek kings, of Ionian princes, of men who fought at Thermopylae and Salamis. They are women who, 2 years ago, lived in palaces of their own. Now they stand behind Persian couches, pouring wine for the men who destroyed their cities. Xerxes sits at the center of the hall, elevated on a platform, so everyone must look up to see him. He eats sparingly, drinks less, watches everything. When he gestures for more wine, a woman steps forward. She is perhaps 35, her beauty not yet faded, but marked by something deeper than age. Those who know the chronicles of the Greek campaign recognize her. The wife of a king who died defending his city walls. The mother of 2 sons who were killed when the palace fell. She pours wine into the king of kings' golden cup. Her hand is steady. Her face is blank. She steps back to her position and stands, waiting for the next gesture, the next command. At one of the lower tables, a Persian general is drunk and boastful. He stands, swaying slightly, and calls for attention. A toast, he shouts in Persian, to the King of Kings, who brought the rebellious Greeks to heel, to the cities that burned, to the lesson learned. Men raise their cups. The general continues, warming to his subject. He begins to describe the siege, the battle, the moment the gates broke open. He does not notice or does not care that one of the women standing behind him is from that city, that she heard those gates break, that her husband was among the defenders the general is now mocking. She stands frozen, the wine jug in her hands. Her knuckles are white from gripping the handle, but her face remains neutral. Her eyes remain fixed on the wall. She does not move. Another general joins the storytelling. He describes the march through a burning palace, the treasure found in the vaults, the way the royal family tried to flee through a secret passage. He laughs at the memory. Other men laugh with him. The daughter of that royal family stands 3 paces away, holding a platter of figs. She is 17. She listens to the story of her father's death told as an amusing anecdote. She listens to men laughing. She does not scream. She does not cry. She does not move. Some said their silence was worse than screaming, because screaming would have reminded them they were still human. Later in the feast, when the wine has flowed for hours and the conversation has turned to future campaigns, one of the women makes a mistake. She is pouring wine for a satrap, and her hand shakes. A single drop spills onto the table. The satrap does not strike her. He simply looks at her, then looks at a eunuch standing by the door. The eunuch makes a small gesture. 2 guards step forward, take the woman by the arms, and lead her from the hall. She will be punished, probably by being confined to her quarters for a month, perhaps by the loss of some small privilege. But the message is clear. Perfection is required. Obedience is mandatory. There is no room for weakness, for grief, for any human response to horror. The feast continues until dawn. The guests grow drunk, loud, careless. They speak of future conquests, of cities not yet burned, of kingdoms not yet subdued. And through it all, the women stand silent. They pour wine. They clear plates. They move like ghosts through a celebration of their own destruction. One woman, standing in a shadowed corner, allows herself a single thought. It is a dangerous thought, a thought that could get her killed if anyone could read minds. She thinks, if I could reach the knife on that table, if I could move quickly enough, if I could bury it in his throat before the guards react. But then she remembers. Her daughter is still alive, married to a Persian official in a distant province. Her younger sister is in the palace, sleeping in one of the golden rooms upstairs. Her obedience is not just her own. It is a shield for everyone she loves. So she continues to pour wine. She continues to smile when smiled at. She continues to breathe and wait and survive. The sun rises over Susa. The feast finally ends. The guests stumble out, drunk and satisfied. The women are dismissed to their quarters. They walk through the empty corridors, past the golden walls and lapis inlays, back to their beautiful rooms. They remove their silk robes. They wash the cosmetics from their faces. They lie down on their soft beds. And some of them, finally alone, permit themselves to weep. But quietly, always quietly, because even here in their locked rooms, their ears listening, guards watching, a system that never sleeps. Daughters of rebels, the secret punishments of Xerxes. The provincial governor sits in his palace, far from the imperial capital, and reads the message again. It is written in the formal language of Persian bureaucracy, sealed with the royal insignia, delivered by a messenger who will wait for a response. The King of Kings requests the presence of your eldest daughter at court. She will serve in the household of the Queen Mother. This is a great honor for your family. He knows what the message really means. He knows because 3 months ago, he met with a delegation from a neighboring territory. They discussed, in whispers, the possibility of coordinated resistance against a new tax policy. They did nothing. They made no formal plans. But someone heard. Someone reported. And now comes the response. Not an army at his gates, not a public execution, just a request that his daughter come to court. The governor looks at his wife. She is already weeping. Their daughter is 15, educated, skilled in languages and music, promised to the son of an allied family. Now she will be sent to Susa, to vanish into the palace, to become another piece in the vast game of imperial control. He could refuse. He could claim illness, could offer a different daughter, could make excuses. But he knows the result. Refusal means open rebellion. And open rebellion means his entire family, his city, everyone under his protection will pay the price. So he writes the reply. The King of Kings honors my house. My daughter will depart within the week. This scene played out in dozens of cities, in hundreds of governors' palaces, across the vast expanse of the empire. Xerxes, like his father before him, understood a fundamental truth about power. A king does not destroy a man. He destroys the man's legacy. That is why daughters suffered more than warriors. Warriors died in battle, their deaths sometimes honored, their names sometimes remembered. Daughters disappeared into the palace, their fates unspoken, their suffering a mystery that haunted every father who might consider rebellion. The term used in official Persian documents was palace service. It appeared in state records, in tribute lists, in the archives of provincial governors. It sounded benign, almost honorable. To serve in the palace of the King of Kings was theoretically a privilege. But everyone knew what palace service meant in practice. It meant a life of controlled captivity. It meant forced marriages to Persian officials, alliances sealed with the bodies of conquered women. It meant bearing children who would be raised as Persians, who would never know their mother's homeland, who would become tools of the empire their grandfather had resisted. It meant sitting in rooms filled with luxury while your life was directed by others, every choice made for you, every year taking you further from any hope of return. In the archives at Persepolis, archaeologists have found tablets listing hundreds of names. Women from Ionia, from Lydia, from Bactria, from Egypt. Age at arrival, family connections, skills, assignments, marriages, children, deaths. Entire lives reduced to cuneiform marks on clay, filed away in the administrative heart of the empire. Some of the tablets record punishments. A woman who attempted to escape, caught at the city gates, returned to the palace and assigned to work in the kitchens for 10 years. A woman who spoke disrespectfully to an official, confined to her quarters for 6 months. A woman who refused an arranged marriage, sent to a remote garrison town on the edge of the empire, never to return to the capital. But most of the tablets record nothing dramatic, just the slow passage of years, arrivals and assignments and marriages and births and deaths. The steady accumulation of lives spent in golden rooms, growing old in service to an empire that saw them not as people, but as pieces of a system. There is a story, preserved in a fragment of Greek history, of a father who received the request for his daughter and made a different choice. He was a minor king in Ionia, a man with no great power, but with a reputation for stubbornness. When the Persian messenger arrived, he listened to the request, then gave his response. Tell the King of Kings that my daughter has taken ill and died. Tell him I will send tribute in gold instead. Then he did something unthinkable. He sent his daughter into hiding with a trusted servant, to a monastery in the mountains where Persian administrators rarely ventured. He paid the servant enough gold to ensure silence for years, and he himself prepared for the consequences. They came within a month. Not a large army, but a small, efficient unit. It did not burn his city. It did not kill his people. They arrested him, transported him to Susa, and brought him before Xerxes. The king asked one question: "Where is your daughter?" The man refused to answer. He was tortured, not with the crude methods of random cruelty, but with the systematic techniques of imperial interrogation. Still, he refused. Finally, Xerxes made a decision. The man was executed, his body sent back to his city as a warning. His younger children were taken to the palace as hostages. His wife was placed under house arrest in a Persian garrison town, and his eldest daughter, the one he had tried to save, remained free. Somewhere in the mountains, living under an assumed name, she survived. The empire searched for her, but the empire was vast, and she was careful, and eventually the search was abandoned. The man's sacrifice bought his daughter her freedom, but it cost him everything else. And the story was told throughout the empire, not as inspiration, but as warning. See what happens when you try to protect what you love. See how the empire always wins? Xerxes did not need to kill them all. He needed them to live in fear, to live in submission, to live knowing that any act of defiance would be answered not on the battlefield, but in the quiet suffering of their families. Women became symbols of Persian dominance. Their presence in the palace, their forced service, their silent endurance sent a message more powerful than any military victory. We can reach into your homes. We can take what you love, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. The long years in the golden cage, 23 years. That is how long one woman, a princess from a Greek city-state, lived in the palace at Susa. She arrived at 17, a hostage taken after her father's city surrendered without a fight. She died at 40, her body placed in a tomb marked only with her Persian name, the name given to her in the palace, not the name her mother whispered when she was born. 23 years in rooms filled with treasures. Her quarters changed over time as her status evolved. First, a small room in the common hostage section, shared with 2 other women. Then, after she proved dutiful and learned Persian perfectly, a private room overlooking the fountain courtyard. Later, after she was married to a mid-level Persian official in a union arranged by palace administrators, a suite of rooms in the married women's wing, with space for the 2 children she bore. Every room was beautiful. Every room had windows that looked out onto carefully tended gardens, onto marble columns, onto the geometric perfection of Persian architecture. Every room was a cell. She never locked a door from the inside, because no door could be locked from the inside. Eunuchs and guards maintained constant watch, their presence so routine it became invisible, but never absent. They changed shifts at fixed hours, their replacements arriving with the soft sound of sandals on stone, a sound she learned to recognize in her sleep. The daily routine rarely varied. Rise at dawn when the gong sounds. Wash in perfumed water brought by servants. Dress in silk robes chosen the night before by the wardrobe mistress. Attend morning prayers in the chapel, kneeling before the sacred fire, reciting words in a language that was foreign for her first 5 years, familiar for the next 10, and eventually more natural than her birth tongue. Breakfast in the common hall. Meals were elaborate, abundant, perfectly prepared. Fruits from distant provinces. Bread baked fresh each morning. Honey and dates and nuts. More food than she could eat, served on golden plates, in a room where 24 other women sat in assigned places, eating in near silence. Watched by officials who recorded attendance, who noted any woman who ate too little or too much, who marked everything in their endless tablets. The mornings were spent in lessons or work. She learned Persian administration, how to manage household accounts, how to supervise servants. She became skilled in these tasks because competence brought privileges, better quarters, more freedom of movement within the palace, occasional gifts of jewelry or fine cloth. But freedom of movement within the palace was not freedom. It was merely a larger cage. Afternoons in the garden. This was the closest thing to pleasant in the daily routine. The gardens were genuine marvels, filled with plants collected from across the empire. Roses from Damascus, jasmine from India, trees that bore strange fruits, water channels that followed mathematical precision, peacocks that wandered the paths trailing their impossible feathers. She spent hours there, sometimes reading from the palace library, sometimes sitting in silence, watching the fountain spray catch the afternoon light and scatter it into temporary rainbows. Other women joined her, and over the years, something like friendships formed. Careful friendships, guarded friendships, because everyone knew that conversations were reported, that even in the garden, words were currency that could be traded to palace officials for favor. Letters were forbidden. She wrote none, received none. The palace had scribes who would write official correspondence for those granted the privilege, but these letters were always read before being sent, always censored, always monitored. She learned not to ask about sending messages home, because asking revealed weakness, and weakness could be exploited. News from the outside world came in fragments. A new captive arriving would whisper information about regions the Persian army had recently passed through. A servant might mention in passing that a city had rebelled and been punished. A eunuch, more talkative than most, might share news of political shifts at court. She heard, in her 8th year, that her father had died. The information came third-hand, from another hostage whose city was near her homeland. She was not permitted to mourn publicly. She sat in her room that night, dry-eyed because tears would accomplish nothing, and tried to remember her father's face. She found she could not. 8 years had blurred the memory. She remembered his voice better than his features, remembered the feeling of his hand on her head in blessing more than the specific lines of his face. Her mother, she heard later, had died soon after her father. Her younger sisters had been married to local families, their fates unknown. The city itself continued, paid its tribute, maintained its submission. Life went on, without her. In her 15th year in the palace, she was summoned to an audience with a palace administrator. She was informed that she would be married. The groom was a Persian cavalry officer, a man of good family, loyal service, moderate wealth. She had never met him. She was not asked for consent. The wedding was arranged for the following month. She stood before the administrator, listening to the details, her face carefully neutral. Inside, she felt nothing. Not fear, not hope, not resignation. Just the blank acceptance that had become her default state. The wedding was conducted in the Persian manner. She wore red silk. She spoke vows in perfect Persian. She smiled when expected to smile. Afterward, she moved to new quarters, larger and more comfortable, in the wing reserved for married women. Her husband was not cruel. That was perhaps the strangest part. He was courteous, even kind in his way. He gave her gifts. He did not beat her. When she bore him a son, he was genuinely pleased. When she bore him a daughter 2 years later, he showered both children with affection. But she never loved him. How could she? He was part of the system that held her captive. A gilded chain is still a chain, even if the person holding it treats you gently. Her children grew up speaking Persian, worshiping Persian gods, knowing nothing of their mother's homeland except what she could tell them in whispered stories late at night. Stories that became vaguer each year as her own memories faded. replaced by the endless present of palace life. In her 22nd year, she heard that her city had rebelled. The news came from a new captive, a woman from a neighboring territory who had been in the region when it happened. The rebellion had been crushed within weeks. The city's new king, not anyone she knew, her entire generation had aged out of power, had been executed. More hostages were being brought to the palace. She felt something then, a flicker of something that might have been grief or might have been the memory of grief. But it passed quickly. That city was no longer her home. She barely remembered its streets. She had lived longer in the palace than she had lived anywhere else. She died in her 41st year of a fever that the palace physicians could not cure. Her husband mourned sincerely. Her children wept. She was buried in the palace cemetery, her tomb marked with her Persian name, her Persian family recorded, her service to the empire noted. There is no record of her birth name, no record of the city she came from, no record of the family she left behind. She exists in the archives only as a successful integration, a hostage who became a proper Persian wife, who raised Persian children, who died having served the empire faithfully for more than 2 decades. And hers was one of the fortunate stories. She had been treated well by the standards of the palace. She had avoided the worst punishments. She had survived. But survival in a golden cage is not the same as living free. The palace still stands, partially ruined now, visited by archaeologists and tourists who marvel at the architecture. Sometimes, walking through the women's quarters, you can see the remains of those rooms. The window frames that once looked on fountains. The niches where oil lamps burned. The floors where women walked for decades, growing old in beauty, dying among strangers. Their ghosts, if such things exist, must still whisper their birth names in the empty halls, must still remember the cities they came from, must still wait for permission to leave that will never come. The psychological strategy behind the cruelty. Picture a map room deep in the palace of Persepolis. The walls are covered with detailed charts showing every province of the empire. On a central table lies a larger map, marked with symbols that represent cities, military garrisons, trade routes. And scattered across this map, like small red stones, are markers representing hostages. Each marker is labeled. The family connection, the political leverage, the strategic value. This was not random cruelty. This was policy. This was a system refined over 3 generations of Persian kings, from Cyrus to Cambyses to Darius to Xerxes. A system that understood something fundamental about power. Fear of a knife at your throat is less effective than fear for those you love. Execute a rebellious king, and you create a martyr. His people will remember him as a hero who died defying tyranny. His name will be whispered in taverns, carved into secret monuments, turned into songs that inspire future rebels. But take his family alive, take his wife and daughters, and place them in the palace, visible symbols of his defeat. Now you have created something far more powerful. A living consequence that persists for decades, that prevents rebellion before it starts, that makes every potential rebel pause and calculate whether their cause is worth the price their loved ones will pay. The genius of the hostage system was its subtlety. Women in the palace were not chained in dungeons. They were not publicly tortured or executed. They lived in luxury, wore silk, ate from golden plates. To the outside world, to visitors from foreign kingdoms, it could even appear as if they were honored guests, examples of Persian generosity and sophistication. But everyone who mattered knew the truth. Every ambassador who visited Susa and saw the captive women serving at feasts understood the message. Every provincial governor who was invited to send his daughter to court understood what he was really being asked to surrender. Every king of a client state who attended palace ceremonies and saw the silent women in their red silk robes understood what awaited any family that chose defiance. The system worked on multiple levels simultaneously. First level, direct control. A king with his family held hostage in Persia would think twice, 3 times, 100 times before considering rebellion. Every meeting with potential allies, every whispered conversation about resistance had to be weighed against a simple question: what happens to my daughter when Persian soldiers arrive at the palace gates to arrest her? Second level, deterrence. The visible presence of hostages from previous rebellions served as a constant reminder. Look, the system said, these women are from kingdoms that defied us. Their families chose resistance. Look where those families are now. Learn from their mistake. Third level, cultural dominance. Women who spent decades in the palace, who learned Persian, who raised Persian children, who were married into Persian families, became living proof of the empire's civilizing power. Look, the system said we do not destroy. We absorb. We transform. Resistance is not only futile, it is temporary. Give us 1 generation, and we will make your children into Persians. Fourth level, economic efficiency. A single garrison costs thousands of gold derricks per year to maintain. Soldiers must be paid, fed, equipped, rotated. But a hostage? A hostage requires only a room in the palace, food from the common kitchens, a few silk robes. The cost is minimal. The political return is enormous. Xerxes, sitting in his palace at Susa, could control an empire stretching from Egypt to India with a relatively small standing army, because the real control was psychological. The real control sat in the women's quarters, lived in the minds of every father and husband in every subject kingdom, grew stronger with each passing year. He did not need to kill them. He needed them to live as warnings. Consider the mathematics of it. A rebellion that succeeds might gain a city its independence, but a rebellion that fails costs that city its next generation. The sons of rebels could be executed quickly and cleanly. Their threat ended. But the daughters? The daughters were more valuable alive. They could be married to Persian officials, producing half-Persian children who would inherit claims to their grandfather's territory, but be loyal to their father's empire. They could serve in the palace, their very existence a deterrent to future rebels. They could live for 40, 50, 60 years, their prolonged captivity a demonstration of Persian power that far outlasted any military victory. There is a cruelty in this that is almost mathematical in its precision. It is the cruelty of the bureaucrat, the administrator, the empire builder who thinks in decades and centuries rather than in individual lives. Xerxes was not a sadist delighting in suffering. He was an emperor maintaining a system that required suffering as one of its fundamental components. And the system worked. For nearly 200 years, the Achaemenid Empire remained stable, vast, powerful. Rebellions occurred, but they were rare and usually quickly suppressed. The threat of what would happen to families kept most potential rebels in line. The women in the palace were not incidental victims of war. They were essential components of the imperial machine. Their captivity was not a side effect of conquest. It was a calculated tool of statecraft. When Alexander the Great finally destroyed the Persian Empire in the 330s BCE, one of his first acts after conquering Persepolis was to release the hostages. Ancient sources record that hundreds of women, some of whom had been in captivity for 30 or 40 years, were freed. Some returned to their homelands. Some, having lived most of their lives as Persians, chose to stay. Some had no homelands to return to, their cities having been destroyed or transformed beyond recognition during their absence. The system that Xerxes maintained was not unique to Persia. Other empires throughout history would use variations of the same strategy. The Romans took hostages. The Mongols took hostages. The Ottomans took hostages. Any empire that understands the psychology of power understands that control over life is less effective than control over what makes life worth living. But the Persian system, in its scale and sophistication, set a standard that would be studied and imitated for centuries. In the archives at Persepolis, buried in clay tablets that archaeologists continue to decipher, are the administrative records of this system. Lists of names, arrival dates, family connections, marriages, deaths, thousands of individual tragedies reduced to data points in the machinery of empire. Somewhere in those lists is the name of the woman from the hook, the Greek queen brought before Xerxes in the autumn of 480 BCE. Her name in her own language has been lost. Her Persian name survives only as a fragment on a broken tablet. But she was real. She lived. She suffered. She died. And her suffering served a purpose in a system that saw people as tools and empires as machines. What these women reveal about power, fear, and empire. The palace of Susa is ruins now. The great halls where Xerxes once sat in judgment have crumbled to foundation stones. The fountains are dry. The gardens have returned to desert. The walls that once gleamed with gold and lapis lazuli are bare stone, worn smooth by wind and time. But if you stand in what was once the women's quarters, in the skeletal remains of rooms where captives spent decades of their lives, you can still sense something. The archaeologists who excavate these sites report an odd, heavy silence. The kind of silence that accumulates in places where too much suffering has been absorbed into stone. The women whose stories we have followed through this script are mostly nameless. Their birth names were erased. Their Persian names survive only fragmentarily in bureaucratic records. We know them by their functions in the system: hostage, wife, mother, servant, warning. But they were real as anyone reading this. They woke each morning to the sound of the gong. They washed in perfumed water. They wore silk robes. They walked through gardens. They smiled when required to smile. They served when ordered to serve. And they died, usually young, usually forgotten, their bones placed in tombs marked with names that were not their own. What does their suffering reveal about power? It reveals that the most effective empires are not those that rule by strength alone, but those that rule by the weaponization of love. Xerxes understood that a man will die for his city, but he will surrender his city to save his daughter. Fear of your own death is manageable. Fear for those you love is paralyzing. Empires are not built by stone and gold alone. They are built by fear, by the suffering of the silent, by lives turned into messages. The system Xerxes perfected was brilliant in its cruelty because it appeared almost civilized. The women were not tortured in public squares. They were not starved in dungeons. They lived in comfort, surrounded by beauty, granted privileges that many common people would never experience. To the outside observer, it might even appear generous. But comfort is not freedom. A cage lined with silk is still a cage. And the psychological torture of watching your identity slowly erased, of being separated from everyone you love, of spending decades as a living warning to others is in many ways worse than any physical pain. What does their suffering reveal about fear? It reveals that the most powerful fear is not immediate but prolonged. The soldier on the battlefield faces death, but death is quick. The hostage in the palace faces something slower: the gradual dissolution of self, the transformation from person to property, the long years of waiting for a freedom that will never arrive. This fear operates not only on the hostages themselves, but on everyone who knows of their existence. Every father in every subject kingdom, looking at his daughter, had to live with the knowledge of what could happen if he chose defiance. Every ambassador visiting the Persian court saw the silent women in their red silk and understood the message. This is what happens when you resist. What does their suffering reveal about empire? It reveals that empires, at their core, are machines that consume human lives and convert them into power. The Persian Empire was vast, sophisticated, culturally advanced. It built roads and libraries. It sponsored art and architecture. It brought peace to territories that had known only war, but also required constant fuel. And that fuel was suffering. The suffering of conquered peoples. The suffering of hostages. The suffering of women who were taken from their homes and turned into tools of statecraft. Every empire in history has made similar calculations. The specific methods vary, but the underlying mathematics remain the same. Power requires the visible demonstration of consequences. Control requires the ability to reach beyond armies and laws into the private spaces of home and family. Stability requires that potential rebels understand the cost will be paid not only by themselves, but by everyone they love. And women, throughout history, have borne a disproportionate share of this cost. Their bodies, their families, their futures have been used as bargaining chips, as hostages, as warnings. The women in Xerxes' palace were not exceptions. They were examples of a pattern that repeats across cultures and centuries. Today, we use different words. We speak of refugees, of displaced persons, of families separated by conflict. We speak of women in war zones, of daughters in occupied territories, of systems that still use control over family as a mechanism of power. The methods have changed. The technology has evolved, but the fundamental strategy remains recognizable. Whoever controls what you love controls you. The women of Xerxes' palace cannot speak for themselves. Their voices have been silent for 2,000 years, but their silence itself is a message. It reminds us that history is not only written by kings and generals, not only measured in battles and treaties. History is also written in the lives of those who suffer invisibly, who endure without recognition, who pay the price for the ambitions of others. The women who spent decades in golden cages, the daughters who became hostages, the wives who poured wine for the men who destroyed their worlds. They deserve to be remembered, not as footnotes to the story of Xerxes and his empire, but as central characters in the true history of power, the story of what it costs, who pays, and how empires are really built. The palace of Susa is ruins now, but somewhere in those ruins, beneath the foundation stones, absorbed into the very earth, is the accumulated grief of hundreds of women who lived and died as prisoners. If you listen carefully, you might still hear them whispering their birth names, trying, even now, to hold on to the proof that before they became hostages, before they became warnings, before they became tools of empire, they were simply themselves. Free. If you believe these forgotten voices deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Humans History. Tell me in the comments which dark chapter of the past you want me to bring back from the shadows next. Because the stories they never taught you in school are often the ones that reveal the most truth about power, about cruelty, and about the human cost of empire.